So, do you need a prologue or epilogue for your book? Now, in my opinion, the answer would be yes, always, but of course that isn't strictly true. They have to be used for a certain reason, and sometimes the reasons just aren't good enough. So, the real answer is it depends how you're going to use it. Now, the prologue in particular, I tend to find, is a good opportunity to bring readers into your world, tackling it at a different angle from your main story. So you can set some groundwork, add some details about the world that they wouldn't necessarily know from just reading the story. But at the same time, you obviously have to not make it essential to read the prologue, because there are people that just decide to skip over it. And obviously if they do that and there's some very important details in there, they're going to miss out on some meat of the plot and the situation at hand. So it's a fine balance of making it interesting to read and with little details, but not so important enough that it will ruin the story if you miss it, but important enough that those that take the time to read it can appreciate and learn more about the world and characters that are in the story itself. That said, of course, it shouldn't just be a monologue of details that you just listen off saying, oh, this, that, this and the other. It has to actually be a proper chapter still, where it can hook you in and bring you into the world before starting off on your journey with the main characters. So for example, if you miss out the prologue in Displaced, my post-apocalyptic book, you don't really miss out on much. You could read the entire story and it really wouldn't make much difference as to whether you've read the prologue or epilogue. Although, that to be said, the epilogue in Displaced is probably the weakest thing. It's about a paragraph long. It added just some details for the next book. That was about it. It really wasn't much to it. I probably didn't need the epilogue in that book, but the prologue definitely served a purpose. So for those people that read the prologue in Displaced, you got to experience a level of depth to a character within Displaced, which was directly tied to them. It also allowed me to focus on a specific place within the book that people wouldn't have necessarily seen with what life is and or was like there. But again, if you missed it, you wouldn't really miss too much with the actual story. So when you're focusing on your own prologue, you've just got to make sure it can add some really interesting angles to your book. But if people do jump it, that's okay. Now for mine, the one that I wrote with the father, mother and the daughter, that wasn't actually the initial prologue I went for. Initially, I went for a chapter with Zara and her parents before she had left her city, and it didn't really work as a prologue. It was just a chapter, but it was just following her journey and it was about to begin, and that's not really what the prologue is about. So I scrapped that completely. That is somewhere on my computer. It hasn't seen the light of day, and I had to rewrite the entire prologue again. And I think it was the last chapter that I wrote for Displaced. So the very first chapter that you read was the last bit that I finished writing with the book, which I guess is definitely a good way to go about it. Once you've got the entire book complete and you've got a better idea in mind of where the story's going, then write the prologue to hook the readers in and bring them into the world. So don't be too precious if you write a prologue and it's not working. Just, don't delete it. Just put it to the side. Maybe I'll use Zara's chapter that I wrote for her somewhere down the line, maybe in a short story. But I mean, for now, it just didn't fit in. It certainly wasn't a prologue, and I'm glad to have changed it out. And I got that feedback mainly from an editor who I hired out, alongside, of course, just letting it sit and then reading it over with fresh eyes and just realizing exactly what the editor is pointing at and going, oh, why did I not realize this? That is exactly it. I need to just rewrite everything, just move away from this idea and add a totally new angle to the world. And it actually allowed me to really go in depth with one of the characters in the book. The prologue has allowed me to add such a background to certain characters, and especially in book 2 as well. It's just such a great tool for using and to adding just some little details that some readers will pick up on, and obviously some readers won't. But for those who do pick up on it, hopefully they enjoy the details and they find it really, really rewarding when they actually discover the character that it is, which I haven't said the character. I don't know why I haven't said the character. People have read the book. I could just say the character, but I'm not for some reason. For some reason, I just can't bring myself to just saying the character. I have to just say the prologue and another character, and Another point of discussion with prologues and epilogues as well is whether to actually name them the prologue or epilogue. Now, I did ponder the idea of changing it from prologue to just the title of whatever's happening within the prologue itself. And I spoke to a few other people and they just said, no, name it prologue, because if I'm trying to be slick and get people in to read the prologue who don't usually read the prologue, they're going to be kind of annoyed if they've been tricked into reading the prologue. I mean, obviously I would hope that they're enjoying it so much that it doesn't matter. But ultimately I just decided to keep with prologue and, read it if you want to read it. If you don't like prologue, skip over it, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it was just an interesting point because I thought I was being like, big brain over here, renaming the chapter and thinking, yeah, this will get people in, they'll read it, they won't even realise. And then it goes on to the story. It'll only open up the opportunity to annoy people instead, so, I left it. And of course, the last mention of prologues as well as epilogues is that because it adds a new angle, you don't really have to attach it as much to the story that you're going to tell. You can jump back in time or forwards in time. You can add a different perspective that you wouldn't necessarily get anywhere else in your book. And so with the prologue I had, it was from a different perspective. And also it was like 21 years before the events of the book, and it was just so helpful because I didn't have to do any flashback scenes or whatever throughout the actual book, because flashback scenes are fine, but they have to be done in a way that they don't sort of cut the flow up of the story too much. Where if I just get what I want done in the prologue, then the story's just smooth sailing. I don't even need to, I don't know worry about it no more. I just keep going with it, tell the story with the main characters, and just use the prologue for adding those details perhaps that are a few years before or a few years later into the book without breaking things up. So it's exceptionally good for just not breaking the flow, not making things confusing, keeping it as simple. I just feel like, especially if you've got a larger story that has a world and several characters in and everything's moving and things are going on, prologues are just so useful for just adding in those minor details. For book 2 that I'm writing at the moment, of course, there is a prologue. Surprise, surprise. And there also, is there an epilogue? I think, there is an epilogue. It remains to be seen whether I actually keep the epilogue in this one, because I don't know, my epilogue, at least in Displaced, is just weak. Like, I didn't really need to mention that, but I did anyway, because I was getting on my own hype train and be like, yeah, this is going to be amazing. So, definitely a prologue for book 2, most likely for book 3 as well. I just love the use of the prologue. And yeah, I didn't really focus on epilogues, but in a nutshell, epilogues are better as a place to resolve things, see where the story ends, maybe add a cliffhanger for the next book. My one, which again, wasn't a great fan of, it definitely added some details, but it was very short, did add a very subtle cliffhanger-esque intrigue into what's going to be happening into book 2, but again, it was literally a paragraph long, and I really could have added some more depth to that epilogue, but I didn't. I just added the paragraph because I was trying to be smart about it. I definitely feel more confident in my prologues than my epilogues. Perhaps I'm using epilogues a little bit wrong. Maybe their best use is at the end of a standalone book where, the resolve is there and you can see that the characters are sort of spread out, they're all happy, things are resolved, the story's cleaned up. And then maybe, I guess, if it is a series, that's the place where you put in the cliffhanger, where for me, the cliffhanger sort of, with my multiple point of view characters, they were within each character chapter. So perhaps the epilogue was just redundant overall. But yeah, I'd love to know your opinions on it as well, and whether you use them and what you use them for. Do you use them for, injecting some extra details? Do you use them for, time jumps like myself, so it doesn't slow down the flow? Leave a comment in the description below and I will reply when I can. But yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.